4780, the murder of Mr. William DeVictum. The scene of the crime, the mansion of Mr. William DeVictum. Here are the facts of the case as we know it. Mr. DeVictum was killed quickly under the cover of darkness during a dinner party. 5 guests were present at the event. All of these guests had some connection to Mr. DeVictum, either personal or professional. A lock of hair that is dark in color and a bloody butter knife are the only pieces of physical evidence. No fingerprints were found on the knife. The coroner noted in her report that the location of the wounds indicate that the perpetrator may have had some sort of previous medical training. First, the deceased, Mr. William DeVictum. Mr. DeVictum was the CEO of DV Enterprises and was in failing health. All of the guests for the evening assumed that he was going to reveal to whom he was leaving the company. The company is worth nearly $2 billion and is expected to grow considerably over the next 5 years. It doesn't appear that there are any specific threats to his life before this evening, although each of the guests had experienced prior arguments with Mr. DeVictum. Suspect number 1, Molly Daggers. Molly Daggers was the deceased nurse for the past 5.5 years. She lives in his home and has done so since she began this position. She is incredibly distraught over the death and has wept uncontrollably at times. Miss Daggers monitored Mr. DeVictum's diet and medications on a daily basis. She routinely provided his baths and lifted him out of bed each day. She was a personal confidant and friend to the victim and is named in his will. She has more than $40,000 in student loan debt and has nearly maxed out all of her credit cards. Mr. DeVictum was paying her only $25,000 a year for her services, less than 1/4 of what she could be making in a hospital. Suspect number 2, Jose Criminale. Jose Criminale has been a member of the board of directors at DV Enterprises, the deceased company, for nearly 10 years. Mr. Criminale is unemotional about the death of Mr. DeVictum and said, quote, "It's about time. Now the company can move forward," unquote. Mr. Criminale was convicted of embezzling funds from another company in 2001 and served 9 months in a federal prison. Many other members of the board indicated that Mr. Criminale wanted to take over as CEO and move the company in a new direction. It was widely believed that Mr. Criminale would be the successor to Mr. DeVictum, which would nearly double Mr. Criminale's current salary and benefits with the company. Suspect number 3, Angie Hasnohart. Angie Hasnohart is the niece of Mr. DeVictum and his only living relative. She stands to inherit nearly $500 million, as well as 25% of the company. She has never been close to her uncle, and there are numerous newspaper articles and television reports about their tumultuous relationship. She has asked for the death certificate 3 times in the past 24 hours. Mr. DeVictum halted her monthly allowance a month ago, citing her recent addiction to pain medication following a serious back injury. Ms. Hasnohart is currently on probation for assault with a deadly weapon. Suspect number 4, Andrew Mean. Andrew Mean is the personal attorney for Mr. DeVictum. They had monthly meetings. He has been incredibly emotional over the death and continues to sob uncontrollably. Mr. DeVictum called Mr. Mean the evening before and requested that he bring Mr. DeVictum's last will and testament, as well as power of attorney paperwork. Mr. Mean asked why this sudden request was necessary but was given no answer. Mr. Mean previously insisted on security for Mr. DeVictum. Mr. Mean is also listed in the deceased's will and stands to receive a majority stake in the company. It appears that Mr. Mean had a father-son type relationship with the victim, and they have no history of quarrels. Suspect number 5, Jane DeSnake. Jane DeSnake has been Mr. DeVictum's personal assistant for 45 years, and she saw him on a daily basis. She is somewhat emotional over his death, but not as much as might be expected for a relationship of that length. She became upset when describing their work during nearly 5 decades together. Mr. DeVictum was demanding and often called Ms. DeSnake at all hours of the evening, on weekends, and even on holidays. His requests ranged from delivering documents to picking up dry cleaning to delivering dinner. Ms. DeSnake never married or had children, and she gave up her nursing career because she devoted her entire life to the deceased. Her bitterness about this is evident. When she was informed that there was no money in the will for her, she flatly said, quote, "I'm glad he's dead," end quote. Ms. DeSnake called an attorney immediately after our interview.